Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
This episode is dedicated to Merlin. Merlin was a 14-year-old Singapura. That's a house cat, for those who are uninformed. Merlin was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in 2006. I remember the date because at the time I was 9 years old. And when we brought him home in a carrier, I was just so happy because I knew I had found a friend. He was really my sister's cat, but in reality he was everyone's cat, because he was just so energetic and lively and funny and bouncing around all the time that you couldn't help but not love him. Merlin had this toy, a snowman, that was part of a Christmas decoration set we got years ago. And Merlin would insist on taking it off the tree and dragging the snowman all across the house. It would go to bed, it would go to the yard, and he would even go into his food bowl. So often my dad would come home from work and find his Christmas plush snowman decoration floating in a shallow tub of water with kibble and crud surrounding it. And it didn't take a genius to find out that Merlin did that. And when he was just a kitten, less than a year old, he was confronted one day in the yard by a rattlesnake and bitten directly above his left eye. For nearly every single animal of Merlin's size and age, a blow to the head delivered by a rattlesnake would have been fatal. Instead, Merlin defied all the odds and lived. He was struck and had to deal with a cataract from the venom that invaded his eye socket and left him functionally blind for the rest of his life. But he lived. And not only that, Merlin followed us from Arizona to California to Georgia and then finally to Alabama for the rest of his life. He was my sister's pet. And even though she was allergic to cats, he would insist on spending every night with her in her room. She'd wake up every night for school, and he'd be sitting directly on top of her chest, staring at her, having fallen asleep on her chest the night before. She'd go to school with hives on her face, and to her, it was a worthy trade-off because she got to spend the night with Merlin. And I remember Merlin because he had this habit where if you scratched him towards the base of his tail, if you scratched him at the end of his tail, he would instinctively start licking himself, like a reflex. Hey, buddy. He'd scratch his tail. He'd start licking himself. He'd stop. He'd stop. You'd scratch him again. He'd start licking himself. And so often I'd take a video and send it to my friends, like, look at this clown. And we'd all start laughing. Because Merlin was just a funny cat. And anytime I'd bend over, tie my shoes to pick something up from the floor, he would immediately take that as an invitation to jump on my back. So often I'd bend over, and he'd jump on my back, and I'd have to kind of waddle across the floor until I could get him to jump off. And for that reason, my mom started calling him Salta la Papa, which is a play on words from the baseball catcher Jared Saltalamacchia into a Spanish portmanteau of salta, which means jump, and papa, which means potato. It's a dumb nickname, but it stuck. And Salta la Papa was our companion for years. I took him once to Alabama with me, to Auburn University to study, and for a semester, he lived with me. And he tore up the couch so bad, I had to end the experiment early and take him back to Birmingham. But Merlin was just the sweetest cat ever. And so many times, I'd be in my room, alone upstairs, late in the night, recording this very podcast at this very channel at GSMC. I'd be talking about baseball, and Merlin would be in my lap. I'd spent so many nights talking about Babe Ruth and Willie Mays and Hank Aaron, with Merlin in my lap, listening to stories about the great players of baseball, present and future and past, all the way into the night with my best friend. Last night, we found out that he had an inoperable thyroid cancer, and we made the difficult decision today to let him rest. I'm 24 years old, and I spent today crying. I thought I was over it, but then I went to the closet to go change into something, and I saw one of my shirts that had his hairs on it, and that triggered it again. And I look around the house, and I see a picture of him when he was a kitten, and me holding him, and I look at the kitchen, and I see his box. There's a box we have in our kitchen where it's a shoe box that has a pillow in it. He'd spend almost every evening in there. It's still there. And I expect him to crawl into it, but he's not. And you don't know him, but he would have known you. He was the friendliest cat I've ever met. And I'm glad that he spent his life here with us. So, this episode tonight is for Merlin. And for the rest of you who have a Merlin in your life, give him or her an extra treat from me. You don't know how long you have, and you can't spend another day not appreciating those who mean everything to you. So tonight, this episode is for Papita. Thanks for everything, buddy.
Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Last week we saw a lot of perfect games. Not in the literal sense, right? We saw 2 no-hitters. John Means and Wade Miley showed up and they shoved. If you don't know, shoved means they pitch really well. Like, you're not allowed to say they dominated, so they shoved is the layman's way of saying Wade Miley and John Means opened a can of absolute kick butt on the offense this week. And that got me thinking, what is the best performance a pitcher has ever made for each team? Like for example, like John Means last week went out and threw a no-hitter. Only one guy reached base on, I think, an error or something. And for Wade Miley, he walked like one guy and that was it. But other than that, they struck out a lot of guys, gave up no hits, no base runners, really. So, was that the best performance their team's ever seen? Like, if not for that game by John Means, what was the best game ever by an Orioles pitcher? And I asked my dad this at the dinner table, and he didn't know. He actually didn't know. It seems strange to think that a no-hitter, that one, especially ones thrown this week, would qualify as the best game ever pitched by the Orioles. But you don't know, do you? And I wondered, how do you quantify that? And luckily, there's always an answer. So there's this statistic called game score. And game score is a statistic that's basically meant to tell you exactly how well of a game a pitcher pitched. And the point is, a game score is supposed to tell you exactly how much better or worse to an average performance a pitcher did. And while stats like ERA or wins or WAR are designed to tell you how much better a pitcher did over a season, game score is meant to tell you how well you did game by game, and to compare game performances across leagues, decades, spectrums, everything. So, Bill James created this as a rough overall gauge of a pitcher's performance several years ago. The scores go from 0 to 100, with an average performance being around 50 points. I think it's theoretically possible to go above 100, but that's basically impossible. To do that, you'd have to throw 9 innings, give up 0 earned runs, 0 hits, and strike out every single batter you face. If you do that and pitch the perfect game, the most perfect game possible, you get 114. And that is essentially impossible. You can't do that. So instead, the plausible scores range from 50, which is dead average, to a radius of maybe like 40 to 60. If you get above 60, then you pitched a great game. 70? Game of the night. 80 or above, you're looking at performance of the season, maybe of your career. So here's how it works. When you start a game, you're announced as the starting pitcher for the team. You're at 50 points. You start with 50 points. You add 1 point for each out you record. So if you finish an inning, that's plus 3 points. And after the 4th inning, if you start the game and you make it past the 4th inning, you get 2 extra points for each additional inning. So the first 4 innings, you get, 1 point per out. And in addition to that, you get 2 points for finishing the 5th inning, the 6th inning, 7th inning, and so on. And you get a point for every strikeout you make. Now, that's the positives. What maximizes the score is mostly finishing innings, and a good secondary is striking everybody out. So it's, can you stay in the game, and can you strike people out? That sounds unfair until you realize that that's the one thing pitchers have control over that is not dependent on the feeling behind them. That and walks, but we'll get to that in a second. So that's what you do to increase the score. Finish innings and strike people out. Now, you subtract 2 points for every hit you allow. You subtract 4 points for every earned run you allow. And you subtract 2 points for every unearned run you allow. And lastly, you subtract 1 point for every walk you allow. So you increase the score by getting outs and striking people out. You lose points by allowing hits, earned runs, and I guess runs in general, and walks. It's really simple. But the point is, you ought to compare games, pitch by pitchers, and tell at a glance who did better. And this is something that people don't talk about enough, in my opinion. The game I play all the time, Out of the Park Baseball, available on Steam and hopefully in the future PS4. Out of the Park does include game score as part of their metrics to predict performance, and it's really good. It's really useful, especially trying to compare people that pitched short games but they were brilliant, or long games but they weren't dominant. It's great for equalizing performances. Like I said, the maximum game score is 114, and that's basically impossible. you'd have to strike out every single batter you face for 9 straight innings, and that just can't basically happen. So, you get 27 points if you throw a complete game. And if you complete a complete game shutout, that is at least 87 points. And, let's see. Wikipedia, and by the way, I'm reading this off of Wikipedia. I knew about game score, but not, of course, off the top of my head with regards to the points you get specifically. But it's possible that there could be drop third strikes, right? Like, if you strike somebody out, the catcher drops the ball, the pitcher gets another chance to get a redo. And it's possible that you can get points beyond 114 if your catcher sucks at his job. So, if that happens, and no one scores, and the pitcher gets all the outs by strikeouts, a pitcher could theoretically record 6 strikeouts per inning and keeping the score at 0. Thus, that would be 54 strikeouts in a game. So, if you add 54, in addition to the 87 complete game, that would be a total of 141. So I guess the most that it's ever possible is 141. But that is just ridiculous. Like, imagine a major league catcher getting 2 pass balls per inning for an entire game. I mean, that's just awful. The next segment should be who's the worst catcher of all time and what was the worst game caught of all time. I think my Little League performance might count. So the highest ever game score for a 9-inning game is Kerry Wood's 1 hit, no walk, 20 strikeout, shutout performance for Chicago Cubs against the Astros on May 6, 1998. So there's only been 3 pitchers who've ever thrown a 20 strikeout game. Randy Johnson, Roger Clemens, and Kerry Wood. And Kerry Wood, in his game, only allowed 1 hit. And that means his game score was 105. That's pretty impressive. That's the highest game score, and thus, according to Bill James's formula, the greatest game ever pitched. Now, the highest game score for a no-hitter happened in my lifetime when Max Scherzer of the Nationals allowed no hits and no walks and struck out 17 batters against the Mets in 2015 for a game score of 104. So Scherzer allowed, well, I guess I should tell you that hits are more valuable than strikeouts. So Scherzer struck out 3 less batters than Kerry Wood, but allowed only 1 less hit, which means his game score is at 104 compared to Wood's 105. And that was just pretty impressive. So more stuff. 21 pitchers have a game score of 100 and more points despite losing the game. Now here's something that's pretty fascinating. Harvey Haddix pitched a game that went 13 innings. A no-hitter, actually a perfect game, into the 13th inning. His game score was 107. The highest ever, and by the way, 107, that's not the most ever. The highest ever losing game score was from a pitcher named Art Neff, who outlasted the other guy by 6 innings, but lost his game in the 21st inning. Yep, you heard that right. This one guy named Art Neff threw a game that lasted 21 innings, has a game score of 118. Back in the 1800s, remember, baseball was way different, and pitching every single game as a starting pitcher it was commonplace. And pitching into the 9th inning every game was basically remarkable. It was the standard. So, a pitcher comes to the game, and his mission would be to complete the same game. No relievers, and you go out the mound and you pitch the next game too. And that was standard. And so, games like 110 for a game score were unusual, but still plausible back in those days. So there's one game in 1920 where It went 26 innings, and both starting pitchers finished the game. So a guy named Joe Oshker had a game score of 153 in the 26-inning affair. And his opponent, Leon Cador, scored 140. They pitched all 26 innings of a game that was eventually called as a tie because both teams just needed to go home. See, that was crazy. So Kadori in that game faced 96 batters, which is MLB record. That is crazy to me. But yeah, as far as anyone knows, the highest game score ever in one game was Joe Oshker's 154 back in 1920. That will probably never be beaten. And on that note, let's save the rest of this article for the next segment. I go over this, tell you about the best performance for every single team in the league across history, and then I'll get you updated on the standings, your team, and the most recent game performances. Stay tuned for more, only at the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thank you very much.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Graham Yavina. We're talking about game score. Game score. Now, you're probably wondering what game score even is. You're like, Graham, I'm a simple man. I listen to baseball podcasts when I should be working. I can handle, two things in my head. What is a game score? A game score is just a way to evaluate pitching performances by the game, not by the season, not by the career, by the game. Did this guy or did that guy pitch a better game last night? Well, game score does that. Start at 50, you do good things, score increases, you do bad things, it decreases. But 50 is the average. Go above that, you're in good shape. So I told you guys last segment about some good performances with game score. One thing I didn't mention was that Walter Johnson and Nolan Ryan have the most 100-point game scores with 4 apiece. Which I guess makes sense, right? Because if you're going to make lists of the best pitchers of all time, Johnson and Ryan are probably at the top of your list. So they both have the most 100-point game scores in history, which is really good. It's twice as good as average performance, with Johnson throwing 2 in 1918, 1 in 1919, and a 4th in 1926. Now, Ryan threw his 100 pointers in 72, 73, and then, this blows my mind, 17 years later, in 1990 and 1991. So, between his first 100-point performance and his last, it was 19 years. There was a 17-year gap between his second and his third 100-point game, which just is incredible to me. I mean, I keep forgetting, Ryan had a career that spanned 4 decades, and he was incredible throughout all of them. And that just restores my faith, I guess, in just his talent. I mean, that guy was just incredible. We all need to accept that. And so, that was Ryan. Warren Spahn had 3 100-point games. And he was another guy that we just kind of overlook all the time. But Spahn was just incredible, you know. I don't know if it's pronounced Spawn or Spain, but he was just an incredible pitcher, too. Clearly the best left-handed pitcher of his decade. His generation, even. So he had 3 100-point games, 48, 52, and 60. Juan Marichal, who is a guy who's been forgotten by history but was incredible, had 3 games as well, in 63, 66, and 69. 8 pitchers had 2 100-point game scores. Art Neff, the guy we mentioned last section, had 2. Joe Oscar, the guy who had that crazy high 154 game score, had 2. Burleigh Grimes had 2. Hall of Famer. Spitballer. Stubble-faced. Eric Erickson, not the political pundit. He was a pitcher who was born in Sweden, which I did not know, had 2. Herb Pennock had 2. Jim Maloney, who also pitched... I was thinking somebody else. Jim Maloney, but no, he was pretty great too. Had 2. Frank Tanana had 2. And Max Scherzer had 2. All of them great pitchers. All of them just tremendous guys. Corey Kluber had a game score once of 98 in an 8-inning, no run, 1 hit, no walk, 18 strikeout performance against the Cardinals in 2015. The highest of any pitcher in a non-complete game. So had he pitched 1 more inning, then that would be 5 extra points to 103, which is pretty good. So the bench coach, Brad Mills, removed Kluber that game in the 8th inning, and the reliever, Cody Allen, finished the game. The previous holder of the record for the highest game score without pitching a complete game was Matt Harvey, who had a game score of 97 against the White Sox. He was removed because the game was tied after like 8 innings or something. I'm trying to think what else I could say. Oh, yeah. What about the lowest performances? Like, what's the worst game ever pitched? And this story is so iconic. It's inevitable that I'll tell you guys about it later. But you know what? I'll do it now. I'll do it now. I'm supposed to do 3 contemporary segments and 1 historical thing, but Jesus, this story is so good. I want to tell you now. And it ties into the topic. It's fun. Let's do it now. So, here's a story. Ty Cobb was one of the greatest players of all time. And he was also a big, mega meaniehead. So, there is a story where Cobb is playing game in 1912. Cobb is on deck in a game in the 6th inning, and he's being taunted with racial abuse from a heckler. So, Ty Cobb was accused often of being mixed race, which in those days was an insult. Now, it's not true. No evidence that was true, but he was taunted for his career. So he's batting, and some fan just starts screaming these racial slurs at him, and called Cobb a very, very unkind racial slur, which I will not repeat here. So Cobb, according to legend, jumped into the stand and started beating the crap out of the guy who said that. And the fan, who was disabled, he only had, 1 hand, and his hand had only 3 fingers. The guy who was screaming this abuse that Cobb was beating up right now, attacking, assaulting, was disabled. And when the fan started screaming at Ty to let him go and saying that he had no hands, then Cobb shouted back, "I don't care if he has no feet," and kept going. And beat the guy to a pulp. That's like if, I don't know, Mookie Betts started just attacking a fan in the stands, which is not okay. It was a different time back then. So the American League president, Ban Johnson, was at the game and saw Cobb leave his position to go attack a customer, which is basically not what customer reps are supposed to do. So he suspended Cobb immediately on the spot, indefinitely without pay. Now Cobb, you should know, was very unpopular with the league. Everybody hated Ty Cobb. But the thing about baseball is that even when your teammate, who's a known jerk, gets banned, he's your jerk. He's on your team. So Cobb's teammates chose to support Cobb, and they didn't play. They chose to boycott all remaining games until Ty Cobb was reinstated. So then, Ban Johnson now has one team that's basically delinquent. So Johnson is upset because the Tigers, if they're not playing, they're going to mess up his schedule. So Ban basically orders Frank Navin, the owner of the Tigers, to make his team play, to field a ball club, and hits him with a $5,000 fine, which today is like $1 million. A $5,000 fine every single game for which they failed to field a team. So then Navin, who's now panicking, orders the manager, Huey Jennings, to find some replacement players. This was before there was a union, so it was easier to basically hire replacements. So then Huey Jennings has like 6 hours to find a team of 9 players to face the Athletics in Philadelphia. So now the Tigers are on the road. They're in Philly, the city of brotherly love. They're playing the Philadelphia A's in 6 hours. Huey has no team, and he's got to find 9 players in 6 hours. So Huey, he starts going to North Philly neighborhoods trying to find people who are between the ages of 17 and 35 and just giving them contracts to play baseball. Like, can you imagine? Like, imagine that I don't know what you do for a living. Like, let's just say you work in a cubicle. Like, you're tasked with replacing your entire department in 6 hours. Can you do it? Can you hire 9 people in 6 hours ready to go to work at your company? Because that was Huey's job. And holy Christ, he must have been sweating bullets. So he goes to a neighborhood in North Philly and finds 9 people. And, well, actually he finds 8 people at first. He finds 8 people and pays them $25. And he finds one guy named Aloysius Travers who agrees to take on the role of the pitcher for a measly fee of $50. Obviously, that's not a lot of money, but Travers agreed to do it. I tell the story because he's the pitcher and had the distinction of pitching perhaps the worst game in Major League Baseball history. So, here's the game. May 18th, 1912. You know, I'm eating cough drop. Let me just go ahead and finish this. There's no Food Network channel. Graham reviews breath mints. I'm like, it's so minty. And you're like, oh, hell yeah, Graham. Just minty goodness. So, it's just breath mint ASMR. Okay. So, the game is Tigers versus Phillies, May 18th, 1912. A long time ago. And the Tigers playing in Philadelphia, and playing for the Philadelphia A's team is just a loaded lineup. Left field is Harl Maggart. Center field's Amos Strunk. Second base is the future Hall of Famer Eddie Collins. Third base is Hall of Famer Home Run Baker. First base is superstar Stuffy McInnes. Shortstop is superstar Jack Barry. And pitcher is Hall of Famer Jack Coombs. So that's, by my count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Hall of Famers for the Philadelphia A's lineup. For the Detroit Tigers, that same game, were 9 people who had never played baseball before. 9 people who had never played baseball before. So Second base for the Tigers was a guy named Jim Maguire, 24 years old, from Philadelphia, kid who played exactly one game in the big leagues, and that was it. Jim Maguire, second base, 24 years old. Third base was a local boxer by the name of Billy Graham. Not the evangelist, but a boxer from Philadelphia. He was a guy who was, he was 31 years old at the time. And he was a local boxer, strongman, heavyweight, but he had never played baseball before either. And he asked that his name be spelled in the contract in reverse. So Billy Graham became Billy Maharg, Maharg. Spelled backwards, you'll see what I'm talking about. And he opted to play third base for the club. Billy Graham / Maharg, third base, 31 years old. Pitcher was Aloysius Allen Travers. He was, at the time, 12, so he was 20 years old during the infamous game in Philadelphia. Street kid from the suburbs, lives entire life in Philadelphia. Went to St. Joseph's University. Good for him. First, last, only game ever in the big leagues. And his game was the worst ever pitched in Major League Baseball history. Batting third in the order. Left field batting cleanup was a guy named Dan McGarvey. Dan McGarvey, at the time, was 24 years old, from Philadelphia. Left fielder, 5'8", 3 at-bats in the bigs. That's all we know from him. Then, center field's a guy named Bill Linehausser. Bill Linehausser was 18 years old at the time. He was 5'10", from Philadelphia. Lived in Holy Cross. That's all we know. 4 at-bats. That's it, man. That's it. Then, first base was a guy named Joe Sugden. Also from Philadelphia. Sensing a trend here. Now, Sugden actually did have a career in baseball. So his debut was in 1893. So Joe Sugden broke in as a catcher in 1893. And the game, remember, was like 19 years later, 1912, when he was 41 years old. So Sugden was an older man, but he did have some experience. So he got priority. So Joe Sugden was the lone statesman of the group. And he had 696 hits in the big leagues, 3 home runs, batted .255, 48 stolen bases, played for 13 years on and off. But this game I'm talking about happened 7 years after he retired. So clearly not at the peak of his game. Then the catcher was Deacon Maguire. Deacon was another guy who played earlier in his career. So he made his debut in 1884 when he was 20 years old. This game happened nearly 30 years later when he was 48 years old. So the catcher was a 48-year-old man named Deacon Maguire who hadn't played baseball in 4 years. So Deacon Maguire was just an old fart who should have been retired for a long time. And he was catching that day for the Tigers. Shortstop was a guy named Vincent Manny. Vincent Manny was, at the time, 25 years old, from Batavia, New York. Never played ball before, never played since. Shortstop. And right fielder was a guy named Hap Ward, who never played baseball before or since at 26 years old, from Leesburg, New Jersey, 5'5". So that was the lineup that was going to face Eddie Collins, Home Run Baker, Stuffy McInnes, and Jack Coombs. They were designed to lose. And the sacrificial lamb that day was Alan Travers, the pitcher and third hitter. So Huey Jennings, the manager of the Tigers, found Alan Travers on a city street corner. The 20-year-old junior from Philadelphia's St. Joseph's College was a violinist in the student orchestra, and he had never pitched a game in his life. In fact, he hadn't even made his school's baseball team. He tried out for his college's baseball club and didn't make it, which is why he was now playing violin. So Travers was serving as a team's manager, and I actually was offered this job when I was in high school and didn't make the team my freshman year. The job basically is that you collect equipment, you shag baseballs, you pitch batting practice if you have to, you prepare goodie bags, you fill the coolers with Gatorade. It's really demeaning work, but you handle all the administrative boring stuff that a secretary should do, but you're doing instead because you liked baseball, but you weren't good enough to make the team. So I declined the job when I was in that position and made the team for real the next year. Didn't look back. But Alan Travers was the team's water boy, basically. And he was now going to pitch a major league game against Eddie Collins, the greatest second baseman of all time. So that is just bonkers. Okay, I'm going to tell you more about this game and the absolute buffoonery that followed, as well as the worst game that ever arose from this. Stay tuned for more. Let me eat a breath mint. Only at the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thank you very much.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We're still talking about the Tigers and the A's in 1912 and the worst game ever pitched. So we're talking about game score, then it led to, hey, what's a good game score? Kerry Wood? That's nice. And my cat is just screaming over there. My other one, Lily. Lily and Merlin were best friends, I should probably mention. And she's going to miss them too. I know we all are. Anyway, so we talked about the best game scores of all time, right? The best games ever pitched. And then we talked about the worst game ever pitched, and it's this one. So the Tigers lost Ty Cobb because he got suspended for trying to kill a fan during a game. And his teammates were like, well, we don't accept those terms, and they quit too. So then the owner tried to find a team of 8 players plus a pitcher to play one game or as many as it takes until they get Cobb back. So they just had to run it. They got Alan Travers. They found him in Philadelphia. They found 8 other players. And the players were, just to recap, Jim McGarr, Billy Maharg, Alan Travers, Dan McGarvey, Bill Linehalser, Joe Sugden, Deacon Maguire, Vincent Manny, and Hap Ward. Sugden and Maguire were actually former ball players. Sugden was like 42, and Maguire was like 48 years old. And they were both, for some reason, playing in the game today. Everybody else had never played before. And I told you before the break that Maharg was actually a boxer named Billy Graham. That was fake news. I told that story from memory because I have this book called Baseball Lore by John Thorne, and he wrote that there, but it turns out that Maharg was his real name. And fun fact, Billy Maharg, the third baseman I told you about, he actually came back to baseball as a gambler. Lily, stop. Hopefully, if I just pick up my cat, then she'll stop screaming and ruin the podcast. Come on, hey. All right, Lily, you okay? She got really quiet now all of a sudden. Cats, I mean, sometimes you just gotta hold them and they just calm down. She's like that. She's very clingy. So, Billy Maharg's name really was Billy Maharg. That's his real name. And later, he came back to baseball as a gambler. He was involved in the 1919 Chicago Black Sox gambling scandal, where he paid them money, along with Arnold Rothstein and others, to throw the World Series and intentionally lose it to the Cincinnati Reds. He was actually portrayed in the movie 8 Men Out by some actor, but clearly he was involved enough in the role that he had a movie character based on him. So Maharg came back to the sport in probably the worst kind of way. So that sets the stage for the game against the A's, who are boasting 4 Hall of Famers: Eddie Collins, Frank Home Run Baker, Stuffy McInnes, and Jack Combs in the lineup against, well, a team with nobody who ever played before. So I've been teasing this for a long time. Let me just tell you how it all went. So again, the context is this is the worst game ever pitched. So Travers pitched the entire game. That was the deal. $50 to pitch the whole game. And he did. He gave up 26 hits, 24 runs, 14 of them earned. So 10 unearned runs due to errors, 7 walks, 1 strikeout. He faced 50 batters in 8 innings and lost the game 24-2. So that is just the worst game ever. The game score for that is negative 52. And remember, an average game score is 50. So he went to negative numbers, negative 52. That's unbelievable. I mean, that is actually unbelievable. And, I mean, I just don't even know what to say about that. So the next day, the American League president who banned Ty Cobb and caused this whole mess, well, I guess you'd say Cobb caused the mess himself, but the guy who banned Cobb, Ban Johnson, met personally with the team of losers and told them that they would all be banned for life if the strike continued. Oh, wait, sorry, I got that wrong. He didn't tell the losers. He told the guys who boycotted the game, Ty Cobb and the crew, that they would be banned for life if they quit any longer. At that point, Ty Cobb urged his teammates to end the strike, sans him, and his teammates complied. So Cobb served the rest of the suspension, but he ordered his teammates to go back on the field so they wouldn't get banned for life either, and they complied. And that was it. Alan Travers and all of his teammates were all cut, and they never saw another game in the big leagues. Billy Maharg, the baseball player turned gambler, did play one more game in the bigs, and 4 years later for the Philadelphia Phillies in 1916. But of course, he's more well known for his role in the Black Sox scandal. Moreover, Huey Jennings, the manager of Tigers, Joe Sugden, the catcher, and Deacon Maguire were actually coaches, and they played in the game for the Tigers. So I guess that's always a mystery. They were the coaches for the Tigers, and they had to fill in. It was their only playing appearance of the year, and that was just awful. So Travers, the pitcher, never played again in the big leagues. His career ERA ended at 15.75, and his WHIP, walks plus hits per 9 inning, ended at 4.13. That is just nuts. So Travers, after the game ended, was reluctant to ever talk about that game again because that was just embarrassing. So later, he talked with sports writer Red Smith and recalled being asked by Jennings to round up as many fellows as he could find to play for the Tigers. Travers claimed to have gone to the corner of 23rd and Columbia Street in Philadelphia, where a bunch of fellows, quote, were standing around in the corner. The bunch of fellows became the Tigers for the day. When asked about his performance, Travers told Red Smith that he threw, quote, slow curves that day because the A's were not used to them, and because manager Huey Jennings told Travers to not throw any fastballs because, quote, he was afraid I might get killed. Travers later became a Jesuit and was ordained as a Catholic priest in 1926. To this date, he is the only priest to have ever played Major League Baseball. Travers taught later at St. Francis Xavier High School in Manhattan and was later named the Dean of Men at his alma mater, St. Joseph College. For 25 years, from 1943 to 1968, he taught Spanish and religion at St. Joseph's Preparatory School in Philadelphia. He lived in Philadelphia for his entire life and passed away in 1968 at the age of 75. So that's just an interesting story because he was 20 years old when he made baseball history. Which reminds me, trivia question. And I'll tell you the answer right now. Who was the youngest person to ever make a Major League appearance? I'll give you a hint. He was left-handed. He was a broadcaster for many years afterwards. And yes, he did go on to have a more successful career in the big leagues, but as an older, actually refined version. His name is Joe Nuxhall. Nuxhall. And he's known for being the youngest player to ever appear in a Major League game. He pitched 2/3 of an inning for the Reds on June 10th, 1944, at the age of 15 years, 316 days. So the backdrop at that time was that World War II was going on. Remember, the year is 1944. The war is going on. Superstars like DiMaggio and Williams were playing. I guess we're overseas at that point. And talent was pretty thin. Remember, the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League was in full swing. Players weren't getting a lot of action, so Nuxhall, at 15, he threw very hard. He threw close to average velocity for Major Leaguer. And they were like, well, it's good enough. So they got him. You know what? Let me talk about this. So Nuxhall was the biggest member of his 9th grade class in Hamilton, Ohio, at 6'2" and 190 pounds. He had a hard fastball, but not much control at the time. He had been playing in a semi-pro league with his dad for a few years at that point. Scouts were looking to fill out the Reds' depleted roster, following Orville Nuxhall, Joe's father, in 1943. But they were told that Orville was not interested in signing because he had 5 kids. And then scouts saw his 14-year-old son, Joe, who was throwing hard and seemed poised and mature for his age. So, and this still is bonkers. Nuxhall signed a Major League contract with the Reds on February 18th, 1944. Now, the general manager, Warren Giles, intended to wait until the season was over to add the would-be 16-year-old Nuxhall to a contract. But more players on the Reds were inducted into the war than Giles expected. So there was a shortage. And the pitching need was crippling. So Nuxhall got permission from his high school principal to suit up for the Reds. And he did. He traveled from Hamilton, Ohio to Cincinnati and was in uniform on opening day. Now, I don't understand how His debut was on June 10th, 1944, but he was in uniform in April. So I don't understand how, unless he just waited for half a season or how that all worked out. But for some reason, he was in uniform but saw no action until June 10th, 1944. As Nuxhall wrote later, quote, I was pitching against 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, kids 13 to 14 years old. All of a sudden, I look up and I see Stan Musial and the likes. It was a very scary situation. On that day in question, June 10th, 1944, the Reds were playing the first place St. Louis Cardinals at Crosley Field. That's home field for the Reds. And trailing 13-0 in the 9th inning. At that point, the manager, Bill McKenzie, called on Joe Nuxhall for mop-up relief. They're down by 13 runs, right? It's not like it's going to matter. So Nuxhall started the game, I guess his inning, well. He faced George Fallon at a shortstop and got him to ground out. 1 out. But then it all went downhill. Nuxhall went on to walk 5 people, surrendered 2 hits, 1 wild pitch, and all told 5 runs. When that was over, he was relieved and didn't make a debut again for a while after that. So 8 years. So he went from a 15-year-old kid to a 23-year-old next time he got a chance to make the big leagues. But so the funny thing is that he pitched 2/3 of an inning, and he was relieved by a guy named Jake Eisenhart. But Nuxhall returned to pitch in the major leagues as a 23-year-old man, and he grew up and he was fine. But his debut was as a 15-year-old. So at the time, he wasn't appreciated as being the youngest person ever to pitch in a Major League Baseball game, because conventional wisdom suggested that there was a 14-year-old boy who played 5 innings in 1887. But in 2009, Saber discovered that boy in question, Fred Chapman, was actually 25, not 14. And as far as we can tell, Nuxhall is the youngest verified person ever appear in a Major League game. Now, Joe Relaford, a 12-year-old bat boy for the Class D minor league Fitzgerald Pioneers, pinch hit in the game, but that was in the minor leagues. That's not the major leagues. But still, that 12-year-old boy, Joe Relaford, is the youngest to appear in a professional game. Nuxhall is youngest to appear in a major league game. So, after that disastrous outing, Nuxhall was assigned to the Birmingham Barons. Hey, that's 20 minutes away from my house. I've been there numerous times. Hell, that's probably down in Rickwood Field. So Nuxhall is assigned to Birmingham after his bad outing. Pitches just 1/3 of an inning. Strikes out 1 guy and allows a hit, 5 more walks, another hit batter, and 5 runs. Nuxhall attends spring training with the Reds the following year in 1945. But he sucks, and so he just decides to quit and go back to high school. So then he just becomes a normal high school kid for a while, plays football, basketball, and baseball for Hamilton High School. And then he goes on to play baseball for the Reds in the minor leagues in Syracuse, Lima, Muncie, Columbia, Charleston, and Tulsa. And then 8 years after his escapades initially, he makes the big league roster at 23 years old. And then he stays. He stays there for, 14 years. He stays in the big leagues, has a good career. Nuxhall's final career line was 135 wins versus 117 losses, ERA of 3.9, strikeouts of 1,372. He was an All-Star twice and was inducted to the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame. And after he retired in 1967, he immediately joined the broadcast team in Cincinnati for his voice, and he was much beloved and worked with Marty Brennaman and Wade Hoyt for several years and won numerous Ford C. Frick nominations. So he was clearly an interesting case. We're talking about game score, and with someone ended up over here. But I wanted to say that the lowest game score since 1957 was Oakland pitcher Mike Oquist, who allowed 16 hits and 14 earned runs in 5 innings on August 3rd, 1998, for a game score of -21. And that's pretty bad. And the most recent game score that was 100 or better happened 2 years ago. Justin Verlander was pitching against the Blue Jays. He threw a no-hitter, gave up no hits, 1 walk, 14 strikeouts. Complete game, obviously. Game score of 100. Before that, Garrett Cole faced the Diamondbacks. And I saw this game. I watched it live, and that was bad. Cole struck out 16 batters, walked 1, gave up 1 hit. Game score of 100. Garrett Cole's first career shutout. And then, of course, before that, there was Scherzer's no-hit performance with 17 strikeouts. Game score of 104. And that was incredible. So, I just thought that was an interesting thing I wanted to mention, because most people I've talked to didn't even realize that was a real stat. But you can compare individual performances with each other. And on that note, that concludes the historical portion of this episode. I will now talk about contemporary baseball in the next segment. Stick around for that. You don't want to miss it. Only at the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thank you very much.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
We're back. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast. We're talking about pitching. Pitching. My favorite part of baseball. You know, people are like, pitchers are getting too strong. I'm like, why is that a problem? You know? Like, if the leading batting average is like 150, good. You know? Like, that's fine. The game goes by faster. Like, Rob Manfred is all like, baseball should be faster. I'm like, well, how about pitchers just start striking everybody out? And he's like, well, not like that. So the point is that Manfred should be fired. So the point is that we're talking about the best pitching performances for every single team in baseball history. So we're going to talk about every team, including yours, and the best game ever pitched for them. Starting with the Los Angeles Angels. So, I actually lived in Los Angeles County for a while, and we'd go to Los Angeles Angels games a few times a year. And I always liked it better than the Dodger Stadium by a mile. So, out of California teams, the Angels are my favorite in the Los Angeles metropolitan area. So, the best game ever pitched in franchise history was, can you guess? Nolan Ryan. He played a game in 73 against the Tigers where he pitched 9 innings, gave 4 walks, no hits, and struck out 17. That was a no-hitter. So that was the second no-hitter. He threw 7 in his career. That was the second. At one point, Norm Cash, the hitter, oh wow, that was a long time ago. Norm Cash walked up with a table leg instead of a baseball bat and told the umpire that with the way Nolan was throwing the ball, it wouldn't make any difference, right? So, Lily's like, that's bullshit. So, whatever, man. So, for the Astros, the best game ever pitched, and that one I did know about, was Mike Scott. In 1986, he threw a complete game, shutout, 13 strikeouts, 2 walks. That was the year he won the Cy Young Award, where he hit 306 strikeouts and 2.22 ERA. That was pretty great. Then the Athletics had a game where Bobby Witt, the pitcher, in 1994, threw a one-hit, complete game shutout where he struck out 14 batters. My cat's doing this thing now where she meows for my attention, and then when I lean over, she runs away. I'm like, well, what do you want me to do exactly? Hang on, let me go pick her up. All right, she's back. Bag secured. Okay. So the A's had a game where Bobby Witt in 94, 14 strikeouts, 1 hit allowed. Game score of 99. The Blue Jays had Brandon Morrow's masterpiece. 9 innings pitched, 1 hit, 2 walks, 17 strikeouts, game score of 100. I remember watching that. He was electric that game. Then, the Braves had one where Joe Oscar, I mentioned this earlier, had a 153 game score. That was when he pitched 26 innings in one game, gave only 9 hits, 1 run, 4 walks, 7 strikeouts, game score of 153. That was a game where Leon Cador also matched him for 24 innings or something crazy. So Oscar had the highest game score in history of 153. Cador had the second highest of 140, both recorded in the same game. Oscar suggested that he threw probably 250 pitches that day, and Cador maybe 300. And if we assume that there are 3 pitches per batter, we're talking about 300 pitches for each pitcher, which is insane. And then the Brewers, their own Teddy Higuera, the Mexican pitcher, pitched 10 innings in one game, 3 hits allowed, 2 walks, 10 strikeouts, game score of 94. The Cardinals had a game where Jose De Leon, not the current one, the other one from the 80s, in 1989, pitched a game against the Reds where he went 11 innings, gave only 1 hit, game score of 103. So it looks like innings completed is more important than strikeouts or limiting hits, in my opinion. The Cubbies had Kerry Wood, 9 innings pitched, 1 hit allowed, 20 strikeouts, game score of 105. Best game ever pitched, according to Game Score. Then the Diamondbacks had Randy Johnson, May 18th, 2004 versus Braves. 9 innings pitched, no hits, 13 strikeouts, game score 100. Now remember, Johnson had the 20 strikeout game for the Diamondbacks against the Reds 2001, but according to Game Score, this game was better because he allowed no hits, and that apparently was more important than having 7 extra strikeouts. Although that doesn't sound right to me. So then the Dodgers had Sandy Koufax in 65. 9 innings pitched, no hits allowed, no walks, 14 strikeouts, game score of 101. Pretty excellent. Then the Giants had Juan Marichal, 63, versus Braves. 16 innings pitched, 8 hits allowed, 4 walks, 10 strikeouts. 112 game score. This when Marichal, as 25-year-old, faced 42-year-old Warren Spahn in this game, and they both went the distance for Willie Mays hit a home run in the 16th inning, which is incredible. So Giants manager Alvin Dark said that he was going to pull Marichal in 13th in favor of a pinch hitter, but Marichal barked that he wasn't coming out of the game until Warren Spahn did, his 42-year-old opponent. That game, Marichal threw 227 pitches. Since that 16 innings pitched game, only one pitcher since has gone that far, Gaylord Perry in 67, who recorded a game score of 112. And after that game, Marichal made his next scheduled start on time on 4 days of rest. So that was just incredible to me. Then, for the Indians, the best game pitched for them was Louis Tiant, the Cuban. 68, 10 innings pitched, 6 hits allowed, 19 strikeouts. Game score, 99. That's just great. Then there was the Mariners, where it was King Felix, his no-hitter, 9 innings pitched, no hits allowed, no runs, no walks, 12 strikeouts. Game score, 99. Then there was the Marlins, back when they were known as the Florida Marlins. Kevin Brown faced the Giants, June 10th, 1997. 9 innings pitched, no hits, no runs, no walks, 7 strikeouts, game score of 94. Fun fact, when I was moving to Macon, Georgia, in 7th grade as a 12-year-old, there were 4 little schools in the area of Macon that were around. One of them was Tatnall. And the coach for baseball at the time for Tatnall was Kevin Brown. He's from Georgia, and he went to coach at Tatnall at the same time I was moving to Georgia in Macon. We didn't go there for school, but that was certainly a contributing factor. Kevin Brown was in my city at the same time I was. Fancy that. Then there was the Mets. Now you're probably thinking of the best game of all time pitched for the Mets. Seaver, Nolan Ryan, David Cone, Dwight Gooden, Matt Harvey, Syndergaard. But none of them pitched the best game for the Mets. That one was a guy named Rob Gardner. Gardner is the most obscure pitcher on this list. So he was 20 years old when he did this, made his 5th career start, and went 15 innings in 1965. 5 hits allowed, 15 innings pitched, 2 walks, 7 strikeouts. Game score, 112. Now, that the rest of the year, Gardner went 4-8, had a 5.12 ERA, was traded to the Cubs next year, developed arm problems, and was pretty ineffective. Career of like 2.5 years. But his game score was 112. And the funny thing is that David Cone was second on the list with a 99 game score, where he had 19 strikeouts and 3 hits allowed. And fun fact, Jacob deGrom's highest career game score is 91, done twice. Now, I think this article is a few years old, and deGrom's been gassed for the last year, so maybe this could be wrong, but deGrom does not have the highest 9-inning game score in Mets history. That would belong to David Cone. Then next up is the Nationals. Max Scherzer threw his no-hitter with 9 innings pitched and 17 strikeouts, game score of 104, which was an incredible game. I remember that. I think I watched the replay of that same day. Then, for the Orioles, 2007, Eric Bedard, the Canadian, pitched against the Rangers, 9 innings pitched, 2 hits allowed, 15 strikeouts, game score of 98. Then for the Padres, I think I told the story before. Clay Kirby was pitching for the Padres in 71, pitched 15 innings, 8 hits allowed, 1 run, 3 walks, 15 strikeouts, game score of 109. He was the same guy that threw that incomplete no-hitter for no reason, where he got pulled by his manager Preston Gomez in the 6th inning, even though he had no-hitter going on. Would have been the first Padres no-hitter if it were not for Joe Musgrove. And then for the Phillies, in 65, against the Rob Gardner I mentioned earlier, Chris Short, the opposing pitcher for the Phillies, faced Gardner that same game, also pitched 15 innings, 9 hits allowed, 3 walks, 18 strikeouts, for a game score of 114. So, that was incredible. For the Pirates, this one I'm going to talk about at some point. Harvey Haddock's perfect game. So, Haddock's lost this game. He pitched 12 innings of perfect baseball. No hits, no walks allowed, no base runners for 12 innings. An entire 25%, well, actually 33% longer than most games. Perfect game for 12 innings. But then he lost it with 2 outs in the top of the 13th inning. He had 1 hit allowed, 1 run, 1 walk, 8 strikeouts. So he walked 1 guy, and Joe Adcock hit a home run to win the ball game. And so he walked Hank Aaron, and then Adcock hit the home run at the top of the 15th inning. And Adcock passed Aaron on the base path, so Adcock was called out, and Aaron was driven in. So that was that. And Haddix, known as the Kitten, was pretty upset about that. But he had perhaps the best game ever pitched in the sense that he went 12 innings, gave up no hits, no runs allowed. Game score of 107. For the Rangers, the best game ever pitched for them was Nolan Ryan. In 91 against the Jays, threw a no-hitter again. 9 innings pitched, 2 walks allowed, 16 strikeouts. Game score of 101. Struck out Roberto Alomar to end the game. For the Rays, their best game was Chris Archer, 2015. 9 innings pitched, 1 hit allowed, 1 walk, 11 strikeouts, game score of 95. Pretty impressive. Then there was the Red Sox. 2001, their best performance was from not by Roger Clemens, but by Hideo Nomo. So Nomo pitched 9 innings, 1 hit allowed, 14 strikeouts, 99 game score. And that blows my mind because I would have thought it was going to be Pedro or Roger Clemens or, I don't know, somebody else. I was surprised to see Hideo Nomo. For the Reds, their best game was from Johnny Vandermeer, who was the only guy to throw no-hitters in back-to-back starts. Vandermeer pitched 15 innings, 1 game, 7 hits allowed, 2 walks, 14 strikeouts, game score of 115. Pretty great stuff. The Rockies had John Gray, and John Gray, 2016 against the Padres, pitched 9 innings, 4 hits allowed, 16 strikeouts, game score of 95. Then there was the Royals, who had Kevin Apier in 95. 9 innings pitched, 3 hits allowed, 1 walk, 13 strikeouts, game score of 93. Pretty great. The Tigers had Jim Bunning, who later became a congressman from, I forgot where, but Kentucky. Congressman from Kentucky. 9 innings pitched, 2 walks allowed, 12 strikeouts, game score of 97. Went on to become a Hall of Famer. Then there was the Twins, who had Walter Johnson one day pitch a complete game, 1 hit shutout, 1 walk allowed, 14 strikeouts, 98 game score. Then there was the White Sox. This is the second last team on the list. Calm down. Gary Peters. 9 innings pitched, 1 hit allowed, 13 strikeouts, game score of 98. And finally, there was Mike Mussina, who in 2001 for the Yankees pitched 9 innings, gave up 1 hit allowed, 13 strikeouts. With 2 outs and 2 strikes on Carl Everett, Everett singled against Mussina and broke up the perfect game. Other than that, it was almost perfect. So, that was pretty great. Anyway, let's talk about the contemporary stuff for baseball. So, you ought to know that let's see, the most recent scores. Let me go ahead and refresh this page. Un momento. All right, so the Reds play the Pirates today in Pittsburgh. The Reds won 14-1. Tyler Naquin hit a home run and drove in 4 runs. Tucker Barnhart keyed a 6-run 4th inning. Together they led a rout, 14-1 Reds. Then the Red Sox played against the Orioles in Baltimore. Trey Mancini hit a go-ahead solo home run and later drove in another run against the Red Sox, and the Orioles won 4-1, moving to 16-19 for the season. The Angels play the upstart Astros. Jared Walsh, the first baseman, had a great game. Hit a home run, 4 hits, Justin Upton hit a home run too, and the Angels won 5-4. The Angels are now 16-18 on the season. Then the Marlins played against my Diamondbacks, my team, and Luke Weaver pitched a scoreless game into the 7th inning for his best outing in a very long time. For his best start of the month by far. And together, the Diamondbacks collaborated and they scored 5 runs to defeat the Marlins 5-2. I'll come back to this one. The Rangers and Giants squared off in San Francisco. Giants won 3-1. The Giants are now 21-14. Dubon hit a home run. Actually hit a single. Alex Wood won a game. Brandon Belt hit a home run. Great game all the way around. And the Padres and the Rockies got postponed, I think, because of weather. And for the Marlins Diamondbacks, let me go ahead and talk about this for a minute. So, Luke Weaver was on the mound for the Diamondbacks. On the mound for the Marlins was Jordan Holloway from Colorado. And young guy. And Holloway got roughed up. 3 innings pitched, 5 hits allowed, 3 earned runs, 1 strikeout. Weaver did better. 6 1/3 innings pitched, 4 hits allowed, no earned runs, 6 strikeouts. And the Diamondbacks bullpen held the lead, and that's how they won the game. Notable performances, well, Peralta hit a triple. David Peralta hit a triple. Jesus Aguilar hit a home run. John Beardy hit a triple. But altogether, that wasn't enough, and Diamondbacks won the game 5-2. And for the last 10 seconds of the podcast, I just wanted to reiterate today that the podcast was about my friend Merlin. And he meant a lot to me. And I'm sure if there's a pet in your life that means a lot to you. So, if you take a minute, just grab your pet, hold them close, give them a treat, and let them know how much you love them. As for Papita, as for Merlin, my friend, wherever he is, I know he's listening. I love you, buddy. Thanks for everything. And that's all for the podcast today. This has been Graham Yaviner for the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Peace.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.